Hey guys!
This is
Lola, Mira,
Yovi,
and Leah. Today we're going to be talking about the progressive era, which includes 4 progressive presidents and Muckrakers, progressive reform, and social issues. Speaking about the presidents,
William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt,
William Taft,
and Woodrow Wilson. Let's get right into it. President William McKinley supported the open door policy. This was a policy that allowed for all countries to be able to trade with China. The Chinese weren't very pleased with this, so they resisted. This was called the Boxer Rebellion. The US and other European countries sent soldiers, and eventually the rebellion was put down and the open door policy remained. His presidency lasted 4 years up until his assassination. An anarchist shot William McKinley, which led to Roosevelt being sworn into presidency.
The next president we'll be addressing is Theodore Roosevelt, who was the youngest president to hold office and re-ran for election in 1904 and won. And he introduced progressive policies such as the Square Deal, which consisted of the 3 C's: conservation, controlled corporations, and consumer protection. The first one we'll be talking about is conservation, which prioritized rebuilding the natural environment, ecosystems, vegetation, and wildlife. Roosevelt made sure to set aside 125 million acres of national forest to create nation's first wildlife sanctuaries. This allowed a balance between money-oriented developments and nature conservation. In 1905, Roosevelt created the U.S. Forest Service, as well as the National Conservation Commission, which produced a survey of the country's national resources. Roosevelt created 5 new national parks: Crater Lake 1902, Wind Cave 1903, Silly's Hill 1904, Platte 1906, and Mesa Verde 1906. And he was called America's first environmental president and made sure to place conservation in America as a public issue. Before he took office, there were a few laws to prevent the destruction of America's natural resources, though these were hard to enforce. Unlike other presidents, he created an environmental legislation that led to the preservation of natural resources enjoyed today.
The next C was consumer protection. Theodore Roosevelt instilled the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food Drug Act after Upton Sinclair published The Jungle, a book that exposed the disgusting practices of the meat industry. These acts required food to be truthfully labeled and prohibited the sale of misbranded food and drugs. It also informed Americans to make healthier decisions about what they were buying. Before these acts, there were little regulations on food and drugs that were sold to the public. The next thing we're going to be talking about is control of corporations. Roosevelt targeted companies that violated the Sherman Act, which was used to break up monopolies to protect consumers from abuse due to large companies being fair through quality and prices. A monopoly is when a single seller has control over a product or a business. This was used to break up companies such as the Standard Oil.
One of Theodore Roosevelt's first priorities was building the Panama Canal, which has been in the works for decades. Even the French tried to dig a canal between 1881 and 1888, but were unsuccessful. He wanted a canal in Central America for faster travel and stronger U.S. power. The plan was that it would be a passageway from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean to cut off a month off of travel time. All the U.S. had to do was get in control of the canal. Unfortunately, when the U.S. tried to negotiate with Colombia for the canal, they got rejected. Although when Panama finally got their independence from Colombia, with the help of the U.S. Navy, they had agreed to give the canal to the U.S., which had gifted them $10 million. The big thing that Theodore Roosevelt was known for was creating the Big Stick policy. This policy was a way to deal with other countries without using violence. He even made a famous quote, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." This evidently meant to negotiate peacefully, but have backup just in case. After Theodore Roosevelt came William Taft. He was president between 1909 and 1913. He continued progressive policies and worked on breaking up big corporations and lowering tariffs. He was famous for making dollar diplomacy. This used economic power to influence other countries instead of using military force, encouraged other Americans' influence and U.S. investments. The way that it worked was it would focus on investing in foreign infrastructure, mainly targeted China, Latin America, and the Caribbean. A pro was that it helped American businesses grow, but on the other side, it ignored local needs, which led to resentment. Next up on the pyramid list, we have Woodrow Wilson, which he was president from 1913 to 1921. He was famous for creating the New Freedom Program that aimed at economic fairness. It broke up monopolies by ensuring no single company would dominate the market. It also established the Federal Reserve by regulating banking and stabilizing the economy by managing money supply and interest rates. It also had promoted labor rights, including an 8-hour workday and a more equitable economic system that would empower individuals and provide opportunities for all Americans. Lastly, it implemented moral democracy, making the world safe for democracy.
The Great Railroad Strike was in 1877, which was a nationwide strike by railroad workers protesting wage cuts and poor working conditions.
Homesteady Strike 1892. Carthage Steel Company fired and cut wages of workers to lower the production costs. This made workers frustrated and resulted in a 4-month strike in Pennsylvania by attacking the steel company security guards and replacement workers. Even though many workers were charged with treason, it ended the restriction on workers at the Carthage Steel Company.
Pullman strike in 1894 was a strike that disrupted rail traffic to shed light to the situation. The goals were union recognition, wage increase, as well as rent deduction.
Flint sit-down strike of 1896, also known as the General Motors sit-down strike, the goal was to change the automobile workers from an isolation collection of union to a major labor union.
The massacre of 1913 was a mass killing that was unsuccessful, which attacked coal miners and their families that resulted in 25 deaths, including 11 children.
Lastly, we have the Memorial Day Massacre of 1937, a strike for steel workers and their families in hopes of receiving shorter hours, more pay, and assigned to contract with smaller corporations. This ended up in a violent result, better recognized as a homicide. The police shot and killed 10 people who happened to be unnamed demonstrators. In Chicago, overall 50 people were shot and 100 others were brutally beaten.
Now we're going to be talking about the progressive era Muckrakers. First we have Thomas Nast, who was a political cartoonist that exposed Boss Tweed's downfall and political corruption, and he also passed away in prison. Next we have Jacob Riis, who wrote How the Other Half Lives, which exposed poor living conditions in the city and led to a revolution in the social reform. Next we have Ida B. Wells, who was an activist and journalist that exposed the horror of lynching in the U.S. She then led a lynching crusade. Frank Norris wrote The Octopus, which exposed railroad monopolies leading to the breakup of them in the Northwest. Ida Tarbell wrote The History of the Standard Oil Company, which exposed ruthless practices within the Standard Oil Company, exposing Rockefeller. Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, which exposed the dangers of the meatpacking industry.
The next topic we're going to be talking about is labor unions. Workers endeavored for better working conditions, shorter hours, and higher wages by organizing strikes through labor unions. An example was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire when the 8th floor of the Ash building caught on fire and workers who were young women and girls trapped inside due to the owner locking the escape doors. This was brought to the public attention by the dangerous working conditions and industry guiding reforms. Labor unions also opposed child labor because they weren't capable of adult jobs, especially in factories. The National Child Labor Committee was established to support child labor reforms based on interviews and photographs of the labor. This contributed to Congress passing the Keating-Owen Act, which prohibits goods produced by children, which led to the passing of the Fair Labor Standard Act.
These are the progressive amendments. The 16th collected income tax, the 17th allowed people to elect senators, the 18th banned alcohol, and 19th granted women's suffrage.
Living and working conditions. The working class live in tenements and poor housing conditions with poor water quality, unpaved streets, and diseases. Kids hard work instead of homework.
Us workers demand to get paid more.
Ban alcohol abuse.
Many women advocated banning alcohol by creating an organization called Women's Christian Temperance Union. The Union Christian Temperance Union desired local laws restricting alcohol caused by women experiencing abuse from their spouse and were afraid for the rights of children and women. Shortly after, the organization worked with Anti-Saloon to support passing the 18th Amendment limiting alcohol sales and manufacture. Women involved in the organization goal was to educate others on the dangers of alcohol during the campaigns. Women leading the temptation movement proved they could achieve social change with opening doors for women's rights. In 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed, which granted women the right to vote, led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, who were known to promote justice and equality for women, yet it took decades for African American women to be included.
African Americans struggled with segregation, racial violence, which included lynching and limited opportunities. Racial segregation by local laws were called Jim Crow laws as a way to limit the rights and freedom for African Americans, such as restricting access to social contact between white and black American citizens. Jim Crow laws were named after a white person who blackfaced to make fun of African American citizens by singing and dancing, representing discrimination. Many African Americans believed in change and thrived for equality. Here are some reforms. The NAACP was an organization co-founded by W.E.B. Du Bois in 1909. Created to advocate for civil rights and political representation for African Americans. Du Bois promoted the importance of the talented 10th, of educated black leaders who would lead the fight against racial discrimination. Booker T. Washington was the founder of the Tuskegee Institute, which was a school for black students located in Alabama. He advocated for economic self-reliance and practical skills for his students because they already had limited opportunities due to the color of their skin. He accepted social segregation if African Americans were provided with equal educational opportunities and justice. I think I hear something. Our mystery document's here. Let's go take a look. Here our source shows a picture of Hatchet Granny, who is one of the most radical women in the Women's Christian Temperance Union.
In conclusion, the Progressive Era was a great time for social and political reforms. The Progressive worked to make America's society a better place to live through cleaning up corrupted city governments, breaking up monopolies, improving working conditions, and creating better living conditions for those who lived in the slums.